Welcome back to the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel. I'm Ed Harmon. We've got another great guest here today. It's kind of like finding the Howard Hughes of North Tonawanda football. This gentleman, a legend at Bishop Gibbons, a Western New York legend, played his college football at the University of Louisville, drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in 1968 in the third round, played for the legendary Tom Landry, and then the next year, the legendary Paul Brown with the Cincinnati Bengals. From his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, it's the one and only Ed Harmon. Mr. Harmon, it is a pleasure to finally catch up with you. You are like trying to catch up with Howard Hughes and Elvis all in the same time. You know that?
Well, you got to stay ahead of the tax collectors and so on. So I've moved in my business career many times. So I guess I've had many addresses and many phone numbers, and I'm glad you finally found me.
I'm glad to have found you as well too. You've been in the Albuquerque area for about the last 28 years or so.
Sure.
Probably it's God's country to you as well, and you enjoy your living there as well over these years.
Yes, we looked around when I retired, and we decided we had a nice home, and it was a nice area. The cost of living was reasonable, and the weather. We have 4 seasons, but the winter's a little shorter than it is in North Tonawanda.
Speaking of North Tonawanda, for those of you who are not aware or they need a brush up on you growing up in North Tonawanda, please share those experiences with us.
Okay, I grew up on Hagen Avenue, which is near Robinson and East Robinson. Went to Ascension School, went to parochial school, all my elementary and high school career. Had a nice family, middle-class family. Parents took care of us, made sure we had enough to eat. That's why I grew up pretty big. And they took care of us and made sure that we had what we needed. And it was good lifestyle. I really, one regret that I have that I don't get back there enough to see some of the old friends, because it was a good experience and a good way to grow up.
Was sports a big part of your family growing up?
It was for me. My parents didn't, they bowled, but they didn't really, weren't active in too many other sports. And they made sure that I had the equipment and everything, or I was able to get to the games and so on. So they took care of me. And like the kids in those days, we didn't play video games, obviously, because they weren't invented yet. So we were outside playing baseball in the summer and football in the fall and basketball during the winter. And so that continued right through my schooling. That went to Bishop Gibbons and played all 3 sports. I actually ran one track event, ran a 440. Found out that wasn't my strong point, and that was the last time I was ever asked to run the 440.
Was it your freshman year or your sophomore year that you went to Bishop, though, because Bishop Gibbons hadn't been built yet?
It was my freshman year. So we obviously took a bus to Niagara Falls every day. Became a little difficult to play sports. I didn't play football at Duffy. I did play basketball, but the transportation became a problem because the buses left obviously after school, drove the kids home, and then the ones who played sports had to get a home on their own. So I had somebody drive me part way, and then either my sister or my father would pick me up and drive me the rest of the way. Still remember, we played on we had practice on a holiday one time, and I had to hitchhike down Niagara Falls Boulevard to get home. I'll never forget that, I guess. So it wasn't easy.
Was football your first love, or did you excel or have a passion for the other sports?
I think I really had the passion more for basketball. I did play 4 years of high school in basketball. I was hoping to get a basketball scholarship, but I wasn't that good. When I went to Louisville, and I pronounced it Louisville, you notice that time. Right. I had to explain that when I came home a lot of times to North Tonawanda that Louisville meant Louisville. so they'd understand what I was saying. But they asked me to play on the freshman basketball team. I already had my football scholarship. I actually wanted to graduate, so I told them no. And they had players like Wesley Hunsell and Butch Beard. And so I was going to be just practice fodder for them. So it probably best that I just stayed with football.
When you walked into Gibbons, you were the first class in the Bishop Gibbons, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And the building had just been built. What were your thoughts being a young kid at that point, walking into this brand new building, and you're starting a brand new era for this school?
I thought it was a good opportunity to get that parochial education and have a parochial school in North Tonawanda. I was the lead class for 3 years. That made a difference because the first year we only had freshmen and sophomores. Then the next year we had juniors. And the last year we were the first senior class. There were only 30, I think it was about 30 boys and 30 girls in that senior class. So it was pretty small pickings. And we were lucky to actually have a team because we really didn't have a lot of kids. We had some great players coming behind us. We had the Sarkovitzes and Helinskis and Aikens and so on. But we only had, again, 30 seniors. So the pickings were kind of small. And I'm looking at the guys over at NT and or Tonawanda, and they had the Casadas and Anastasis and so on. I guess we just didn't have enough Italians. We had all the Polish kids playing for us, so we needed more Italians. But it was a good experience. I wish I could have played against some of the Rick Casadas and so on. They're the legends in North Tonawanda. We were sort of the second-class citizens, so to speak, because we were the smaller school. And they got to play against the bigger schools, and we played against some good schools, some of the parochial schools out of Buffalo and southern Buffalo. St. Francis was big down in Athol Springs, and they actually had some kids that boarded there, and they came in from New York City and played. So that was some challenges.
Describe the early Gibbons teams, the early Bishop Gibbons football teams, and how you guys fared. Were you good, not so good? You had obviously small squads, and you also had some talented squads.
Yeah, Hank Lewis was our head coach. George Herman was our assistant coach. And then George was also our basketball coach. We probably didn't have obviously the depth, as you said, of the team. We held our own pretty well, didn't win a whole lot of games, but we were in most of the games anyway. And enjoyed playing it. Again, wish we could have had one shot at North Tonawanda or Tonawanda. Probably would have got killed, but that's fine. We enjoy it.
You've gained a reputation as being a ferocious hitter. Where did that come from?
Well, it came later on. I probably wasn't mean enough in high school. I don't know. Maybe I learned that at Louisville. I know I learned it after I was done playing because I played rugby for 7 years, and I had even a worse reputation at that point. But I think the reputation came at Louisville. We had two linebackers, myself and a guy by the name of John Neidert. So we got a lot of press. We both were drafted in 1968 after the 1967 season. And so I think that reputation, that publicity was from the press. And we did pretty well, John and myself. Had some good players at Louisville. A very good friend, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago, was Wayne Patrick, right, who played obviously with the Bills and played with the Bengals as well. Wayne was, I went to Louisville as a fullback and a linebacker. I started my first game our sophomore year. We couldn't play our freshman year. We just had to practice. The freshmen weren't eligible. So my first game I started as a fullback for Louisville. I was actually on the kickoff team, and we had two guys deep. Wayne's very good friend from high school played on our team too, and his name was Andy Williams, not the singer. That's different Andy. He was supposed to be the one we wanted to catch the ball, and I was going to be his blocking back on the kickoffs. Well, they found out, let's kick it to the big slow guy over there, and they kicked off to me. And I was leading the Missouri Valley Conference in total yards for kickoffs for about 3 weeks because they kept on kicking it to me. And then our coaches said, let's just put Andy back there by himself and let him run him back. So I played mostly fullback and some linebacker my first year. Doug Buffone, who played a long time with the Bears, he was our main inside linebacker. I replaced him my junior and senior year. And so the hitting came in, I guess, my junior and senior year in college. I was big in high school, though, too. I was 6'4", 220, probably my senior year. So maybe that's how the hard hitting and ferocious hitting. I don't know how ferocious it was. It was just some big guy hitting them.
Were you ever tempted to go or tempted by the NT coaches or tempted to go to the public school and join the NT squad?
I talked to George Vetter. Had to be probably after the Duffy season before I went to Gibbons. And I considered it, but I wanted to continue my parochial education. Looking back, I got a good education, so I can't complain about that. The football, it might have helped me a little better, would have had more visibility probably at NT, but I enjoyed Gibbons, and I enjoyed the people, and I was glad I could be the beginning of the school and get the school off on the right track. I don't know how good of a deal we did because they closed within 10 years, but it was a good experience and hopefully set some ground rules for the students that followed us.
Do you think that was an advantage going to Gibbons with your athletic career, that you were noticed and you got a lot more playing time as opposed to being on a bigger squad and maybe getting lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, that probably. I didn't get a lot of exposure, obviously, at Gibbons. Scholarship-wise, could have gone to the University of Buffalo. I had a feeler from Tennessee, and that was because of the Urbanos. Their dad had a store close to our home. We used to go over there all the time, so the relationship was there. Tennessee scared the hell out of me, though. Coming from North Tonawanda and a small school at Gibbons, that really went on to Tennessee, and that's big time. Would have that worked out well? I might have got lost in the shuffle there. Louisville was a smaller school. It was away from home. I thought it would be a good experience to go away from home for college. So that worked out probably the best.
You hear about recruiting trips or whatever. How many recruiting trips did you take, and how did they woo you? What did they do to entice you? Did they give you a steak dinner or take you to dinner, or what was the recruiting process back in the mid-60s?
They took you to a bar? No, they really did. We'd have dinner. Back then, you'd hang out with the players during the day and evening. Plus, you'd have a meeting with the coaching staff, probably for an hour or two. I remember flying to Louisville. That was the first time I ever flew anywhere. I think the plane went from Buffalo to Cleveland to Columbus, maybe to Cincinnati, and then to Louisville. The flights weren't real direct in those days. And the players just, we went to, let's see, they were done with the season. So it was like in the springtime, it had to be like February or March. So they were just working out basically on their own, but hung around with the players more than anything. Not the big time that they have now. I mean, even in Western New York in those days, probably Rick Casada probably was wooed probably pretty well by some big schools, but we just didn't get the visibility, and it's fine. I mean, it's a different world out there now, and it's with the media and everything else. Everybody knows what everybody's doing throughout the whole country. We were a little restricted to Western New York schools. If you got a scholarship at all, there was a lot of guys in our class that probably deserved a scholarship more than I did, or as much as I did. Guys like Mike Cox, he was probably the best athlete in our school, and I mean, and there were other guys too. The Tom Sarkovitzes. Sark is a good friend of mine, and his family was real good to me. His dad, Don, and his mother, Emma, is 99 years old, and she's still with us. And they were like second parents to me.
Was your recruiting process word of mouth, or was there film that was distributed to some of these coaches, or how did it work back then?
Very little film, old black and white. I don't even know what type of film it was at that point. I ended up at Louisville more so because of one of the coaches in our league from St. Francis. He moved to Louisville and opened up a business outside of football, and he got familiar with the coaches at Louisville, and he recommended me to the coaches, and that's basically how I ended up going to Louisville, was through word of mouth. And then he also coached, I don't know if you remember, a guy by the name of Pete Campisi from Western New York. Pete was a 3-star athlete down at St. Francis, and he had a few scholarships, and he went to Louisville. I was the captain my senior year at Louisville, and he was the following year. He was the captain. So Pete and I played against each other in high school. Then we ended up going to college together. So that was a good experience. And there was 2 or 3 other players from Western New York. So when we came home, we usually drove together. So 4 or 5 of us would drive in the car all night from Louisville to get to Buffalo, about 600 miles, and we'd drive at nighttime. Usually go to a basketball game, Louisville basketball game, and leave after the game was over and drive all through the night to get back home.
During your college career, did you have aspirations to play in the National Football League or the American Football League, or how did that process come about for you?
I think most of the kids, I mean, I think you aspire to do that while you're still playing in the backyard in grade school and high school. But we had a lot of visibility. We'd always have a player from our squad from Louisville drafted. So we did get visibility. They were sending out letters at that time from the different teams. So I had maybe letters from 6 or 7 teams if I'd be interested in the San Diego Chargers at that time, and whatever teams it were. And they had scouts come to watch us play. Had some visibility. We weren't real big. We played North Texas State, Cincinnati, Kent State. Kent State was good because my parents had a pretty easy drive. They could drive over there and watch us play. So that worked out well. Then the recruit, even like on draft day, I was hoping to go early in the draft, and I was hoping to go first, as everybody wanted to do. But I was drafted in the third round. I remember I was in the dorm waiting for that phone call. Never got the phone call, so I drove over to a friend's house, and luckily I had given somebody that phone number. I guess whoever answered my phone in the dorm, because there was probably a payphone somewhere in the dormitory in those days. They gave the number of my friend, and they got me over there. And the Cowboys called and told me they drafted me in the third round.
And then you go to Dallas. Can I ask you how much you made that first year with Dallas?
Boy, I'd be proud. I tell people because it was so ridiculous. I was third round draft choice. My bonus was $10,000 in a brand new Pontiac Grand Prix, and I made $15,000 a year. But the next year though, I made $16,000. So I got a big bump in salary that next year at Cincinnati. So I think the guys today maybe carry that money in their pocket, but that was my annual salary. And we all had jobs. I actually taught school back in Louisville during the off season because we all needed jobs. So even the players like Don Meredith, Bob Hayes, and so on, they all had jobs during the off season.
You go to Dallas, you're probably a little bit awestruck. I mean, it's a loaded squad. You mentioned
Right.
Bob Hayes and Don Meredith and several others, and the linebacking crew was loaded.
Chuck Hawley, Leroy Jordan, and Dave Edwards were our three line. I used the three linebacker system, and those were our three linebackers, and they were great. And then drafted in the same year as me was D.D. Lewis from Mississippi. So we had quite a few linebackers.
And was the competition fierce for a job to be on the Dallas Cowboys in 1968?
Yes, it was. Unfortunately, I didn't fare out as well. I was on they called it the taxi squad in those days. Now it's the practice squad. So I was on that all year long. If somebody would have got hurt, I might have been activated, but they never were. So I got to practice a lot against some great players. Yeah.
Did you have like a chip on your shoulder at that point that saying, my God, a boy from North Tonawanda via Louisville is now playing for the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, you should be here in Albuquerque. They even think it's a bigger feat than really. I mean, it was an enjoyable experience, but Albuquerque is a very, very solid Dallas. You're either a Dallas Cowboy or a Denver Bronco fan, and that's a big situation here. And being the king of the hill in Dallas at that point, it worked out pretty well, and you can have that chip on your shoulder. But I wish it would have lasted longer. But it was good for my career. It was good for my business career later on. I always had that on my resume. If people weren't interested in the business end of it, they would like to talk about the Dallas Cowboys, and it got me in the door in a lot of situations that I could talk about football instead of business to start with.
How was it to play for Tom Landry?
I cried the day he passed away. He was the great coach and a better gentleman. And I remember where I was the day he passed away. I was in a hotel in San Diego. I went out to see, I went out to Torrey Pines, watch a golf tournament. And I was in the lobby of a La Quinta Inn, and I walked down there, and it was on the news down in the lobby that Tom Landry had passed away. And I stood there and bawled like a baby. And people probably thinking, why is this guy crying? But he meant that much to me. He, after the short time I had there, I went back about 7 years later. I was back in Dallas on business. So I figured I'd go over to the old practice field, see if I can say hello to anybody, because there was D.D. Lewis was still there, Ralph Neely was still around, and Roger Staubach, who actually came the year that I was released, the second year, he was there, and went to the gate, and I knocked on the gate, and the security guy said, these are closed practices. And I said, well, I played here a long time ago. I wondered if I could come in and say hello to some people. And he went over and asked a couple of the coaches and said, yeah, let them in. And after the practice, Coach Landry said, I want you to come to my office. And I went to his office, probably spent half hour with him, just talking. He was concerned about how I was doing, how my family was doing. And it showed a lot of his character, how he was concerned about a player who didn't play a whole lot for him, but he was there, but he still had concern for that player 7 years later. Now Paul Brown, I don't know if I would have gone to the practice, even though I don't think Paul would have been that hospitable, but he was a great coach.
You did play the Cowboys wanted to move you to defensive end your second year.
No, they actually wanted me to be an offensive guard.
Really?
Yeah. I had never played offensive line. And I'm going, boy, the end is in sight now. And I went and I made it to the last cut. And God, I can't remember. Coach Myers was the coach. And when they released me, he said, Ed, that first day of practice, I wouldn't give you a snowball's chance in hell to be here this long, that you lasted this long as an offensive guard. He said, you did a good job. He said, but we really have the guys back from last year. So I was the last guy cut, which is not a good deal to have happen to you, because all of a sudden the other teams are cutting down their rosters, and it's tougher to get picked up by somebody. But I did get picked up. When I went on the waiver wire, I said, do me one favor, put me down as a linebacker and not as an offensive guard. And I got picked up by Cincinnati.
At that point, were the AFL and the NFL
we were still separate, yeah.
But were you pooling players at that point, or how did you end up going from NFL to AFL?
We were drafted by the players were only drafted by one of the leagues. It was a total draft. I can't remember, what was there, 30 teams or 26 teams at that time. The AFL and NFL merged probably a year before that. So you were drafted, I believe you couldn't be drafted by both the AFL and the NFL. You were just drafted by, they were merged together, I guess you would say.
A common draft, because they down the road in 1970, they actually put both leagues together and made it the NFL. But a couple of years beforehand, if I remember correctly, they were in the process of making one common draft. So
I think it was 2 years before. Doug Buffone was drafted by both leagues. He was drafted by the Bears and Houston in the NFL, and I think Houston in the AFL. And so they had some bargaining power there, and they made a little more money 2 years earlier. Then the following year became the common draft. I believe I thought it was in 1967, which was actually the year it was the common draft.
Okay.
And you may be correct on that, but we were only drafted by one team.
Did you have a choice of going to Cincinnati, or was it they picked you up on waivers?
They picked me up on waivers.
And then
I was hoping for Buffalo to pick me up, but they obviously didn't.
how was it to play for Paul Brown? And it was a young team. It was a couple years in
second year.
expansion.
It was the second year of the team. We did okay. We won probably, I don't know, you probably may have the figures in there.
It was a 4-9-1 record that year.
Okay, well, I was going to say 6, but we had a decent team. We had a quarterback by the name of Greg Cook.
Right.
And Greg probably could have gone on to be all pro, but he threw his arm out playing basketball during the offseason after his rookie year and really could never throw the ball again. So it was a shame because we had Sam Weich, who was a quarterback, and then we had Greg. And then they got Kenny Anderson after that came in. But Greg could have been a real good one, but he messed up his arm real early in his career.
Do you think that you were picked up by Cincinnati because so close to being to Louisville? They knew.
Probably helped. It helped. It made it convenient for me because I had a house in Louisville, and we didn't practice on Mondays. And those, I think they practice on Mondays now. And if they have an off day, they have off Tuesday. We had off Monday, so I could drive home back to Louisville Sunday night, and then stay in Louisville on Monday most weeks, and then drive back Tuesday morning for practice. It's a different time frame, different way of life, and the football players what they have now and what we have then. See, nowadays they'd fly. They'd have their own personal plane to fly home. No, but it was a good experience. I wish it would have been Buffalo. Played against Buffalo.
Right.
Played in the old rock pile. Probably the worst locker facilities in the NFL all time. We were freezing. It was right around Thanksgiving time. It was snowing outside. You couldn't see one end of the field from the other. And what the old rock pile seat, maybe 35,000 people at the most. It was packed when that game started, and my parents were there, and my family was there. Probably Tom Sarkovitz and a couple of the guys from Gibbons were there. And at the end of the game, I think my mother and my father were the only ones still sitting in the stands. And I believe the score was like, do you have the score in front of you? It was
16,
like 7-2.
It was 16-13. It was the Bills winning that day. It was November 30th, 1969 that you were there.
Well, I'm glad you have a lot better recall than I do.
No, I just got good.
You got all the stats in front of you.
Well, no, I just know how to use Google a little bit more effectively and doing research and speaking with you today. Describe playing for Paul Brown.
Super disciplined. To be honest with you, I think it had passed him by a little from the Cleveland Browns. He was very vindictive with Art Modell for firing him. I mean, the team's named after Paul Brown, and he fired him at Cleveland. So when he found the team, I think his main goal in life was probably to beat the Cleveland Browns. He knew the coaching, but again, how many years do you know how many years he was out of the league? Maybe 6 or 8 years.
I don't have that in front of me, but I mean,
you got to Google that.
Ed. Right? Yeah.
You have to Google that. But the game had changed more to a passing game than a running game, and he was just very disciplined. If he didn't like the way you were playing, you were cut. I mean, there wasn't going from first team to second team. You were cut, and then he did that to a number of players. I was in fear every time you left, you were in fear of losing your job. I played against the Jets, and we came back home that weekend. I go, well, boy, maybe they're going to cut me this week. I go back in there. I was the player of the game. We lost, but I guess they had to give it to somebody. They gave it to me as the player of the game, and I was actually worried that weekend I might be cut. We had a punter on our team, Dale Livingston, and I played against Dale in college. He was actually a quarterback and a punter at Western Michigan. And he punted, and one time, we were probably losing the game, and we were probably on our own 30-yard line and had 4th and 7. And then Dale thought he could make it on his own. He remembered his quarterback days where he could run and still run. Well, he gained about 2 yards, and they got the ball in our territory. Paul Brown came in at halftime and basically said to the whole team, in front of the whole team, said, Livingston, if I had another punter, I would cut you right now. He said, but I don't have another punter. He was cut immediately after the game. So there was a little fear in everybody's heart while they were playing. But he was a great coach and very disciplined. And it was good. Landry was disciplined too, but he did have some compassion for the players.
Was it because of injury that your pro career ended, or how did that work out after the 1969 season? Or what happened with that?
I broke my leg in the second last game against Oakland, going down on a kickoff, and it was in the big pileup, and I heard it snap. And there was a guy by the name of Rod Sherman. I don't know if you remember that name, played with
Right.
the Raiders. He was on the bottom of the pile there as well. And he heard it. He said, are you okay? I go, yeah, I think I'm okay. The adrenaline was still in my system. I got halfway to the bench, and then my leg just gave out, and I had broken my leg. So that was the second last game of the year. So I didn't play the last game of the year. And I probably would have started because one of our other linebackers got injured in that game. So we were a little thin that last game of the year. And then the following year, 1970, that was one of the strike years. We went on, the veterans were on strike at the beginning of the season, then strike during the season. But we didn't go into camp for the first 2 or 3 weeks of training camp. So that's all they had were rookies at camp. And rookies got a lot better look that year than a lot of the marginal players like myself. So maybe if I would have been there that whole training camp, maybe I would have made the team. But being a marginal player, they said, this rookie was here for the whole training camp. So they kept a lot more rookies that year than normal.
Did you have any residual effects of your broken leg? Did they just set it, or did they do
They
surgery
set
on your
it.
legs?
Yeah, they didn't have to operate. They just set it there, and it was fine. Leg was good. Knock on wood, I've never had any knee injuries. I've had 3 hip replacements, but I think that was partially from playing rugby for 7 years or whatever, 9 years, whatever I played. And, played in Chicago and played back in Louisville for a while. That was good. That was a good experience too. That was fun.
And when you were released in 1970, did you have any thoughts about getting picked up by any other teams, or how did the teams contact you, or did you contact teams, or did you know it was time to give it up?
I probably should have been more aggressive contacting teams. I was contacted by Minnesota later during the season, but not for that 1970 season, to come to training camp the next year. I asked them if there was any guarantees, and they said no. And again, today you'd have to go after that because the money would be so great. But then I was making almost as much money in the public sector that I was making in playing football. Not maybe as much visibility, but I decided it's probably better just to keep a job and go from there.
How hard was it for you to take the helmet off and the pads and going any type of withdrawal that first football season afterwards?
It was difficult, especially since I moved to Chicago, and a friend of mine, John Niter, was playing and Doug Buffone were playing for the Bears, and I'd go to the games and I'd walk in there basically with them and then go to the seats, and there's kids asking me for my autograph, and I go, guys, I'm not with the team, but I was 6'4", 235, and I looked like I was a football player. So it brings back some thoughts that, God, maybe I should have kept on going, but it worked out well. I have no regrets. Got a great family, and had support from everybody in everything I've ever done. And I wish I could have come back to North Tonawanda more. I did come back and live there for a little while on business. I was transferred like 7 times. I was with General Electric. And everybody said, how'd you get with General Electric? I said, well, when I was released from Cincinnati, I had to find an honest job, and I couldn't find one, so I went to work for General Electric. And I was with them for 30 years. And they transferred me around about 7 times. So they were good to me. And I think they appreciated what I did for them too.
Was playing rugby your way of, number one, keeping active and keeping in a contact sport?
Yeah, it was by accident. I had no idea what rugby was about. A friend of mine at GE said, hey, want to play rugby? I said, don't know I don't know anything about it. So I figured the first couple of practices, I'd sort of follow him and see what he's doing. I found out a little later on that he knew just a little more than me, but we had a lot of Europeans. When I started playing more seriously, I was the only American on the team. Everybody else was either European or South African, and we had some good teams, especially in Chicago. We had a lot of competition there. Played in some all-star games actually in rugby. Was invited. They were going to have rugby as a participation sport in the Olympics, but they wanted me to go, and they wanted anybody who did go, they had to go out to Colorado at that point and train for 2 weeks before that. So I would have to give up my job to go out there. And I'm glad I didn't do it, because it would have been a good experience, but I had a good job, and I didn't want to ruin that.
I want to go, you bring up training. I want to go backwards a little bit. What was your training regimen like during college and during your pro years?
In college, obviously go to school during the day. We'd be at practice by about 3:30. Had very few meetings, surprisingly. A lot of film sessions after the games, but it was more hands-on physical practice than meetings and going over plays as much. We did it more on the field than off the field. And the pros, it was more of a split between on-field and off-the-field practices on the playbook and so on, and films as well, obviously.
Was there a lot of emphasis on weight training and nutrition at that point?
Oh, no, really wasn't. We didn't do much in college. It's funny, with the Helinskis, they were big weight guys, and I worked out with them during the off season, and shoot, they were bench pressing more than I did. I got up to 300 pounds bench pressing one time, and that was my goal. And I really wish I would have continued it more, but they really didn't emphasize the weight training as much as the endurance training. So.
On the pro level, was training camp the way to get in shape, or what did you do to
No.
try to keep in shape during the season or during the off season?
During the off season, yeah, they gave us a schedule they wanted us to do on it was a 6-day-a-week regiment that they had specific things they wanted us to do, and then even both in college and in the pros, they had some testing when we got, and make sure we were in shape when we got to the first day of training camp. And we started training camp at Dallas like the 4th of July, and that we really started early. They used to have 6 preseason games.
Right.
So I did get a lot more experience in, but most of it was in preseason. So.
Did you ever, after your playing days and probably after rugby, did you ever pinch yourself and say, look at this kid from North Tonawanda and what he made of himself, and had a good college career at Louisville and had a couple stops in pro football, and I'm a blessed person, or what were the type of thoughts going through your head at that point?
I figured I was a more blessed person, and I don't think I ever had a super big ego. I was proud of what I did. I'm still proud of it today. I guess I don't appreciate it maybe as much as other people would, or people who have not experienced it. They always say, oh, you played professional football. I look back and I said, yeah, I had that opportunity and worked out well. But I'm still Ed Harmon, and I like to treat people like we're equal, and I don't feel superior because I played professional football. I feel like I'd like to be a good person as well.
I'm not sure if you pay attention to high school football or college football or even pro football these days, but if you do, what's your thoughts on all of this? Especially the equipment's gotten better, the nutrition, the training, the fields. I mean, some of the high school stadiums are stadiums.
Yes. I played on AstroTurf even played in the old Astrodome. I played there twice. One time it was raining like crazy outside. But we're inside. I really appreciated being inside. That was the only covered stadium at that point. But that AstroTurf was right on top of cement. It was the hardest fall you'd ever have. And they've improved the equipment, or the turf. You mentioned the equipment is so improved. So many problems with the guys from my era with the concussions, even more so than now because of the equipment itself. I am a very big advocate of the NFL concussion protocol. What they do now, I've gone through the protocols system that they have of testing you. I went out to Vegas for 2 days and went through that. I think every player should do it. If you played one game, if you were on the team at one time, any time, the NFL players are eligible to take those tests, and NFL won't pay for your transportation, but they'll pay for all the testing for 2 days. And I think every player should have it done if they haven't had it done. The equipment is great. The stadium, here Buffalo's getting a new stadium. Ed, why aren't they covering the stadium? Why isn't it enclosed?
Well, it costs another $1 billion. That's why. I mean,
what's another billion now and then? But the state is just so superior of what they have. Thank God the equipment is better too. Guys are so much bigger. They're so much faster, and that combination, they're going to hit so much harder.
let me ask you something. You can be honest with me or not.
I'll try to be
Between
honest.
high school, college, and pro football, how many concussions do you think that you had during your career?
Three that I can remember. Maybe there's a couple I can't remember because I had a concussion. I do recall 3 of them for sure.
Any other serious injuries that you had that might have been undetected, or that you faked injuries so you wouldn't lose your spot in playing time? I mean, that's a common game that plays with college athletes, with college football players as well.
No, I played 3 games with a torn bicep in college. I tore my bicep making an arm tackle, and I had 3 games yet to go my junior year. And my junior year, I was only 19. And I tore my bicep. I thought I had bruised my arm. I went to the doctor and he feels my arm and says, yep, you have a torn bicep, we're going to have to operate. And I said, no, I can't. I said, I got 3 games left. What can we do? And he said, well, it's going to have to be operated. I said, and this was when I was starting getting some of the flyers from the pro teams. And I didn't want to jeopardize myself by not playing those 3 last games my junior year. So they've never called my parents. And I was a 19-year-old kid. I didn't have to have contact during the week for practice, but before the game, they'd shoot me up with Novocaine and cortisone in my arm. I'd put on my pads, I'd play the first half, come in at halftime, take off my pads, they'd shoot it up with Novocaine and cortisone again, and I'd go out and play the second half. Did that for 3 weeks, and didn't probably help my arm in the long run. They did operate after the season. I have lot less mobility with my right arm than I do with my left arm. And it was part of it. Now, I didn't at the time, but I did then. And so today, that just wouldn't happen today. And that, which is good. I mean, I didn't fight it in those days because I wanted to play.
We have a lot of kids that high schoolers that watch our videos. For those in the high school football program right now, what type of advice would you give them regarding their football careers, and if they aspire to go further with it?
If they really want to play, take it as far as you can and give all you can, give 100% all the time. Respect your coaches. Respect your fellow players. Don't get a big head and think you're the greatest thing on earth, because the next guy you're going to run into thinks he's that way. And he could be your teammate or it could be your opponent, but he's also a person, and just treat everybody the same and treat everybody equally, and be a good person and not just think you're the best in the world.
We've talked a lot of different subjects here right now. What would you want to talk about that I haven't brought up yet? It's your forum right now.
I'd like to say hello to everybody in North Tonawanda. I feel badly that I didn't stay in touch with them. I will try to get there. I'm going to have maybe Tom Sarkovitz or my nephew, Pat Kennedy, get some guys together, go over to the 3rd Ward and go over there for a beer or 2, and maybe go to Casada's restaurant and enjoy some of the old times in NT and bring back some of the memories from Gibbons and from North Tonawanda, and I have a lot of friends in Tonawanda too. So it was a good experience. It was a good lifestyle. It was just a good way to grow up when I was a kid. I mean, times have changed, people have changed, but it's something we can always look back at.
One final question for you. How would you like to be remembered by?
As a good person, and good athlete, and a good person. And That was from North Tonawanda.
Ed Harmon, this has been a lot of fun. We've done it almost an hour now. I want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure catching up with you. Better yet, a pleasure finding you and actually speaking to you a couple weeks ago and setting this up. So I wish you well. Best of luck
Thank
to
you.
you and continued health in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate the time.